everyone. I'm Steve Smith, President and CEO of Airlink. Thank you for joining me for another episode of FlightPath. Here we aim to highlight innovation, deliver insight, actionable guidance, and lessons in best practice to the people working in the humanitarian response and disaster logistics space, all from experienced organizational leaders. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So today's guest serves as President and CEO of Project C.U.R.E. In addition to that work, he serves on the board of directors for Interaction, the Partnership for Quality Medical Donations, PQMD, World Denver, the Nando Center for International and Comparative Law at the University of Denver, the World Trade Center Denver, and the Ruckert-Hartman College for Health Professionals at Regis University. He received a Lifetime Achievement Award in Healthcare from the American Red Cross, the 5280 Magazine Philanthropist of the Year, and most recently, the Prince's Prize for Innovative Philanthropy from the Prince Albert of Monaco, and the Leadership in Global Engagement Award from the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a fellow of the Aspen Institute and has taught at the university level in the disciplines of finance, investments, leadership, development, legal and international issues, and is a frequent speaker and lecturer to colleges and universities, conferences such as TEDx, as well as civic, corporate, and community organizations. Dr. Doug Jackson, welcome, and thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. And thanks for a kind introduction.
So before we dive in, I just want to say to our listeners that Project C.U.R.E. has been a partner of Airlink's for a number of years now, and we're really excited and proud to support their mission. So thanks so much for everything you do, Doug.
Thank you, guys. It's we love working with Airlink, and your team has just been amazing to work with. And I can't say enough good things about the organization that you've created.
That's very kind. That's very kind. Thanks so much. So now, Doug, for those of you, for those of our listeners that are not familiar, can you tell me a little bit about Project C.U.R.E.'s model and how it works?
Yeah, so we have ended up being just a huge player in the space of going out and getting donated medical supplies and equipment, packaging them up in mostly 40-foot cargo containers, because this stuff is heavy, it's bulky, some of it you can't put on airplanes, and we send it out to places around the world who need it, and people are dying without suture and gloves and things like that. And then during disasters, of course, that's where we end up working with you guys so closely, because then we airlift the stuff in and make a big difference. One of the things that's kind of interesting about our model is that, first of all, we always start with a needs assessment. And isn't that appropriate to be talking to the CEO of Airlink when an airplane goes by? Anyway, we start with a needs assessment, meaning that we decided early on we weren't ever going to just sort of pick a place and push our way in. We were going to wait until somebody invites us to come help, number one. Mm-hmm. And then number two, before we ever started doing things, we actually go boots on the ground. We sit down with the doctors and nurses at the hospital. We've got about an 18-page assessment that we do. We've developed over the last 35 years. And it'll take us the better part of 3 or 4 hours to get through this with all the leadership of the hospital. And then we pick up our cameras and we go and we take pictures of every room in the hospital. And that's really what creates our best work, I say. The adage is the food never gets better after it leaves the kitchen, right? And so that's our kitchen. And we get out there and I mean, literally scrub into surgery sometimes. Let's just go see what really is. And that's the beginning stages of what we do. Then we come back, we look in our warehouses. We've got 7 of them now across the United States. And these are all 50,000 square feet or more. They're racked up 3 high. It looks a lot like the last scene in Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're pushing the Ark of the Covenant back into the Smithsonian. That's what our warehouses look like. We go through those warehouses and we start comparing what we have to the stuff that we just saw in the field and what their needs are, and we match it up. And then before we ship, we send that list back and we say, okay, make sure that everything that's on this list is what you really want. Because we're not going to send you eye care kits to a maternity hospital. And we're really trying to be really careful about that. So that's kind of the model. And the other piece of it that makes us really unique is that we only have about 35 paid staff. And in any given year, we'll have over 30,000 volunteers. And about 1,000 volunteers per paid staff is a pretty good ratio.
I would say so. That's great. So tell me, I'm interested in your leadership of the organization. So Project C.U.R.E, it's very clear, it has helped lots and lots of people around the world. And how long has the organization been around?
So for 35 years, my family started it in my mom and dad's garage in 1987. Yeah.
Oh gosh, wow, that's tremendous. And so, you talked about a tremendous amount of volunteers, right, to achieve your mission. So talk to me a little bit about, the role that you play in leading the organization and kind of the things that you're focused on.
Well, it's interesting because when I first started, and I'm going back now 25 years. I'm an attorney. I did a PhD in finance. I thought I was going to go off and do hedge funds or private equity on Wall Street. And my dad asked me to come help for, family project for 6 months. And that was 1997. So I've been doing this for 25 years. And when I got started, we had about $100,000 top line. And, we had 12 volunteers and one beat up old warehouse next to a strip club. And it was kind of humble beginnings. And so I started on the trucks, and I brought my friend Dave and my friend Doreen over. And I mean, we were out in the warehouse sorting medical supplies with the nurses. I love nurses. These men and women are the people who really make hospitals go round. And so we depend on them a lot to tell us, I mean, what does a lawyer know about public health, right? Nurses know a lot and doctors know a lot. And so we started recruiting them and working alongside of them, and we'd get in these big covered trucks, delivery trucks, and we'd go pick stuff up at the hospitals. And so we started looking at that. And I've got this belief that, there's a difference between art and science, right? Mm-hmm. There was only one Warhol. There was only one Monet. When those guys are gone, they're gone. You can create art, but it's going to be a Steve Smith. I can create art. It'll be a Douglas Jackson. But it resides in our head. That's different than the scientific method, which means you come up with a process. And if I can replicate it and get the same result as you, we call that science, right? And I mean, Julia Childs, she created science in the kitchen. And everybody can cook like Julia Childs because she wrote it down. It's a recipe. That is the same for nuclear reactions as it is for, whatever. That's the scientific method. It works the same way in business too. And if I wanted to get Project C.U.R.E to go to scale, I had to figure out what I was doing, scientize it, if that's a word, and create it so that people can get the same result. This is what Ray Kroc did with McDonald's, right? There is a way to make a Big Mac. One way to make a Big Mac. Starbucks is the same thing. We can be in Beijing and get the same, triple grande latte as we get in Seattle. And so we've really worked at trying to scale Project C.U.R.E by figuring out what the science is, teach it to these 30,000 people and see if we can't replicate it.
That's very interesting. And so, with all these 30,000 volunteers, it's obviously sort of lifeblood of what you do and great process and procedure. But working with volunteers is sometimes challenging, right? Tell me some of the challenges you've had, and if you had to sort of pivot over time. You've learned a lot, I'm sure, in 35 years doing this.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that you have to think about is sort of what just makes sense, right? And let me give you an example. I've got way more education than I have in intellect. I've been educated far beyond my common sense, for sure. In all the time that I spent going to university, going to school, I still cannot find a book in the library because I don't understand the Dewey Decimal System. And the librarians have tried to show me it's just easier to go get the librarian and have them find it, because the Dewey Decimal System was created for librarians, not for readers. But I can walk into any bookstore, Barnes and Noble, let's say, and everything is alphabetical by author, by subject. And I go over to the business stack and I look for John Maxwell's new book, or or Malcolm Gladwell or Seth Godin or whoever, and it's right there, and you can pull it off the shelf and find it. So what we had to do was to create our systems to be more like Barnes and Noble and a lot less like the public library. Because when a volunteer comes, we only have them for about 2 hours on a given shift. Now, some people will stay all day, and we've got some volunteers that have been with us for 20 years, which is just incredible because they just really bought the mission, right? And they understand what we do, and they've given their lives to it the same as we all have. But anyway, so there's more efficient ways to run our warehouses, but they're not fun and they don't make sense. And so we have everything as, in a numbered order and all of this kind of stuff. And we've really sat back and looked at it and said, okay, can I train you in 20 minutes to do what you need to do? Because if I can provide you a really great volunteer opportunity. But if I create this really complicated system and try to explain why, a 1407 is in front of the warehouse because that's closer to the dock and we want to minimize spaces and steps and this and that, and the 1408 is in the back of the warehouse, forget about it. 1407 is next to a 1408, it's next to a 1409. Go to the 1407, pick out 2 boxes, bring them to the truck, And so it's been kind of a fun learning experience to try to see what makes sense. And then to have it make sense to the nurses. Our sorting system, we went to the nurses and said, let's talk about how you use the stuff, not how the manufacturers put serial numbers on it, because that doesn't make any sense. And the nurse will say, oh, well, when you grab this, you got to grab that. When you put this together, this thing is called a Yankauer tip. It's a suction that goes on the end of a line. And, this is how we build suction. Okay, put it all together. That makes sense to me. And when it gets there, it makes a lot more sense to the end user too.
Yeah. Interesting. Not just the practical side, but also the harnessing of that energy from volunteers. I agree. You can't mire it down in complexity and make it dull. People are wanting an experience here, right?
Right.
So it's interesting. I'll ask you about this because I know that you just talked about how you work so hard to understand what the key needs are on the ground and the things we're moving. But it occurs to me that there are a lot of highly energized people really want to help take up collections, raise money, all these different things, and and there's a lot of cases and sad stories about, okay, now we've got a big tractor trailer's worth of stuff that shouldn't really be going, and I know that it sounds like you have a framework and a system that can address certainly some of that and help direct some of that. Because even for Airlink, we have calls. Hey, we've got all these things that we've collected, and we've got money too, but we're not quite sure what to do with either.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really, really tough situation. And we saw it in Haiti. People would go down to Haiti, and they really want to help. I mean, it's not that they're poorly motivated. It's just that for people who had never been to Port-au-Prince ever, it's a tough place to go on its best day. And then you go there and there's no running water and there's no place to sleep and no sewer systems. And now you want to help, and there's people with blunt force trauma and shock and everything else. And okay, let's get really real about what you're going to do here, because you can crowd up the avenues for assistance by trying to do things that, it's interesting. After Katrina, we actually had things donated to Project C.U.R.E because people were sending stuff into Louisiana and it couldn't be used. They hadn't thought about that. And so, they said, hey, can somebody else around the world use this? And some of it was good stuff. But we're seeing that with Ukraine, somebody just goes and gathers up a bunch of clothes. Well, that's great, except that you can't bring used clothes into the EU. And all that stuff's going to have to go through Poland, as you know. And now if it's brand new and it's in a package and it's, you don't need certificates of fumigation and all those other details. Even the pallets have to be heat treated pallets. We just spent better part of $10,000 buying pallets so that they didn't bring bugs into Europe. Well, You got to know that stuff, and you got to know it before you get into the middle of it, because you do not want to be having that conversation when your load is locked up in customs for a silly little detail that you should have known and you didn't. You know,
yeah,
it's
all
just
this
it's
stuff
a
needs to
crazy
be
thing.
figured out first. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So tell me, so you mentioned Ukraine. So let's talk about that for a little bit, right? I know obviously we're working together on a number of things, but tell me about Project C.U.R.E and what you're doing for Ukraine, because you're doing a lot, right?
Yeah, we started working in Ukraine in 1994, believe it or not, and had done a whole lot of work. We've got great partners. There's a good friend of ours, Dr. Brian McMurray out of Nashville, who, when the war started, he actually went back. Everybody else was leaving, he said, and this line of cars exiting Ukraine, going into Romania, going into Poland, they're the only car going in, and everybody else is coming out. And he spent time back in the hospitals in Donetsk and places like that where we worked with him. We've got other partners in other parts of the country. So before the war, we had already put about $20 million of medical relief into Ukraine, just trying to help them get out of the sort of Soviet medical cycle, and it was tough anyway. And then all of this starts to happen, and so we started getting calls, and our first container was canceled because they closed the port in Odessa. It took us about a week to figure out how to reroute that container, but it's 60 days to get there. Well, geez, that's a long time. And so that's where our two organizations started working together, and we figured out pretty quickly what we need. Part of it was our experience. Part of it was our friends on the other end saying, look, we're looking for tourniquets, hemostatic bandages, blood clotting material, all of the things that you need, gauze, bandages, to treat shrapnel wounds and bullet wounds and just all the horrible things that are happening to people over there. And so we started palletizing it and getting it over. But it was really back to the point that we were just discussing. It's based on our experience and having worked there, for the better part of almost 30 years. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's great, and you're doing a lot of things there. And what I'm interested, sort of change lanes a little bit. I know that the program will be long and deep for Ukraine, but let's look into the future a little and just talking about the humanitarian sector. I'm interested. Your thoughts on, as we look to the future, we've got rising climate-related events, refugee numbers off the charts being driven by these conflicts, ongoing conflicts, new conflicts. What are your thoughts on the sector at large in terms of, how it's doing, how it needs to change?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. And just because we've got Russia and the Ukraine on top of mind right now, but I remember when the Soviet Union came apart, and this is in the early 90s, and there was all this conversation about a peace dividend and how we were going to take all of this money that we used to invest in the Cold War and we're going to put it into humanitarian. And I mean, we really had a lot of hope about things that were going to change. And to think that not very long after that, I mean, in the history of the world, the difference between 1992 and now is not very long. And to be back into probably, if we're not careful, what could be the Third World War, it's a pretty frightening deal. I don't think even the greatest minds saw this one coming. Or if they did, we certainly weren't talking about it in time to get in front of it. So I think part of the challenge with humanitarian disaster and with this sector is, it's what Seth Godin talks about, build your engine to the tightest tolerance that you can and expect everything to go perfectly and know that it won't. So it's that balance between tolerance and resilience. And I think we know where everything's headed, and then we realize we really don't. And then now we're in this position of having to pivot back. Who would have thought coming out of a pandemic that we would end up in a war in Europe? It's just, and I don't think it's a black swan because we talk about it, we make movies about it. We just really don't think it's going to happen. So I think with the climate change thing, the big issue right now is going to be how much of the world's wheat farming was done in Ukraine and Russia. And, the answer is somewhere between 20 to 25%. Well, I'm seeing reports already. Cindy McCain was on my board until she took the position at the UN as a U.S. ambassador to the World Food Program. She and I were back and forth on email the other day, and she just said, Doug, it's going to be bad. It's going to be really bad. And we're going to have to get ahead of that. Famine like what we've probably never seen before, just because of this. So I think that, some of those unintended consequences, I think we're going to really have to address. And we're talking about climate change. One of the good things I think that's happening is to see people, being able to take care of themselves. And our goal at Project C.U.R.E is always, put us out of business. I've sat in hospitals all over the world and said, okay, just so we're clear, the vision is one day you're going to look at me and say, thank you, Project C.U.R.E, for coming when we needed you. We don't need you anymore. And they laugh and they're, oh yeah, it's never going to happen. It happened in Estonia. We did a lot of work in Estonia. They don't need us anymore. We worked at the Asaf Harofeh Hospital in Tel Aviv. They don't need us anymore. So there is a possibility to do that. And that's a very cool thing. And you're watching that happen, I think, in some of these places. But I'm not sure that the next sucker punch, we're not even going to see it coming, as smart as we think we are. Because the last three we didn't see. We didn't see COVID, we didn't see Ukraine. Who would have thought that you would have the problem in the northern part of Ethiopia like we have right now? I mean, hundreds of thousands of people being killed and displaced in what, not too long ago was a pretty nice place to be. And they were showing a lot of promise. They had the African Union there. They just brought all that to Addis, and they're back shooting each other again. And it's just like, God, can we stop doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's an important point of all those things that are heavy weights on us. There's so many other events happening around the world that are eclipsed by this conflict. So tell me, I mean, as a leader of a global organization helping address all these issues as best we can, understanding that even these long-term programs that build up and try to and solve issues over time can all just be wiped out by one big sort of white squall event. How are you and sort of leading your organization and thinking about okay, what do we do for the future to somewhat sort of prepare for this?
Yeah. I think we were talking just a little bit ago about scaling. I think that's an important thing. I love the term, let's go steal from our cousins, meaning there's some really great people doing some really cool stuff in affiliated sandboxes. It's not exactly medical humanitarian, but it looks a little bit like that. What's their best idea that I can take and apply to what we're doing here? And so one of the interesting, cool things I think that came out of COVID was the fact that we all learned how to do this. And we had Skype, but I didn't Skype that much, But all of a sudden, within 6 weeks, I mean, we were all figuring out how to look at each other and talk. And sometimes I kind of wish that wasn't the case anymore. I've had to start wearing these a lot more, and all of that. But what a cool thing, because if you can do this here, you can do it there. And so we've had a lot of conversation about how do we take, we do a lot of training around helping babies breathe and essential care for every mother. And we wrote our own diarrhea management program, and we're working on cervical cancer stuff, trainings. And so we put the supplies in, and then we go, train around them. And can you do this on Zoom? Yeah, probably. Why not? And so there's some neat things that we have borrowed from other places. Just what we're doing in Ukraine. What you guys do to go to airlines and get excess capacity didn't used to happen. Marshall Plan, they weren't putting stuff on United Airlines. Mm-hmm. They had to requisition military aircraft. Well, that's a cool merger of a couple of different things across. And somebody just said, why not? The answer is, there's no reason. Let's do it. Yeah.
Well, I think at their core, organizations, airlines, they're just people, right? And so people want to help. And, you know, we see that, and we've seen that for, gosh, ever since we've been in existence the last 10 years from the airline. So that's great. And we're happy to support it. Well, but listen, Doug, I think we could probably keep talking for like the rest of the day. I think we have so much interesting stories, but I think we're probably almost up on time now. And you know, I just want to thank you for spending the time with me today, sharing your story. I really wish you and your team all the best, and you know, we stand by to continue supporting all of your efforts.
Well,
thanks for joining.
Well, so appreciate all you do, Steve, and your team at Airlink. Tell them all thanks so much from our team on this side, and we'll just keep trying to change the world. You know, that's the coolest thing I think about what we do. I tell my team all the time, I say, you know, people talk about, hey, let's move the needle. Let's not move the needle. Let's bend it off in the opposite direction, right? Let's make a really big change. And that's exactly what we get to do on a daily basis. And that's a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, it's very cool. That's very cool. Well, thanks so much, Doug. And to my audience, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And I look forward to speaking with you on a future Flight Path episode. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.